So this is the delicate. Welcome back to another episode of No Bolts Left Behind. Today, I'm engine swapping my 1968 Mustang with a fuel-injected 5.0 liter V8. Originally, this was a 6-cylinder car, so I have some V8 conversion stuff to do. In case you haven't seen the first part of the build series, let me bring you up to speed real quick. I bought this Mustang with an inline 6, and after struggling for quite a while to get it to run right, I decided to yank it out. Then I bought a running, driving 1996 Ford Explorer with a 5.0 V8, basically a Fox body Mustang V8 with some more modern electronics. I pulled that bad boy out, along with the transmission, drive shaft, wiring harness, ECU, and 8.8 rear end. And today, we're installing that 5.0 and AOD transmission in the 68 Mustang. So before we get started, let's go over all of the parts you'll need to do a V8 conversion on a first generation Mustang. So first things first, if you have a 6-cylinder like I did, an original 6-cylinder car, you'll have these 6-cylinder motor mounts, these guys right here. And these are actually just a pair of original, stock V8 motor mounts that should bolt, I'm hoping they will, bolt right up to where the 6-cylinder engine, mount brackets bolt up to. And to go with these guys, you'll need a couple of, just stock, normal V8 motor mounts. These are probably a good thing to replace anyway, so I got a pair of those as well. And this is the transmission crossmember I'm gonna need to bolt in that AOD transmission. It's actually not too different than what the C4 transmission used, other than being like a little bit stronger. Actually, here, I think I still have this guy. So this is what the stock transmission used, and this guy obviously just puts it in a very slightly different position, only a couple inches back and pretty much in the same sort of like width here for the mount. So just a slight difference for the transmission, but otherwise I'm hoping, and from what my research tells me, this guy should fit right into the transmission tunnel as it is. I guess we'll see how this works out, but that's the theory. All right, next big conversion piece you're gonna need is the oil pan. So if you have an Explorer engine like I do, you're gonna have sort of like a bolt front, mostly rear sump. You can kind of see it's sort of behind the tire, but there's a big sump in the rear and then actually a small sump in the front. But basically this is like a rear or like a split sump pan, and that does not work with the setup here in the Mustang. So since there's a bunch of steering linkage back here, you're gonna need a front sump pan. And I grabbed this guy, which is pretty much the stock pan from what you'll see on a 289 from this era. Basically a stock 68 289 oil pan, which should bolt right up to this 302. The mounting holes in the block and all that stuff are basically the same. So luckily these guys are pretty cheap since they're not like conversion parts, so they're not tripling the price of them for no reason. This is just a stock pan. And you will need the oil pickup tube as well. Again, very cheap stock piece. And that guy will match this front sump pan. Now, one problem that you're gonna have to kind of get creative to solve is where the oil dipstick tube is located. And on this particular block, it's hanging out right, I got a plug in there, but it's right there on the back of the engine block, which sends the dipstick tube, checker, whatever, the dipstick into the rear sump. And you're gonna have to convert that to a front sump oil pan. And I didn't find really a great way to do it. And from what I can tell, most people end up changing out their whole front accessory system. So all of this stuff here, the brackets or whatever, actually I think it's mostly the timing cover. But once you replace this, then you're gonna have to replace the water pump, and you're gonna have to get new alternator brackets and all of that stuff. So, and even then, you're gonna have to modify that different timing cover to accept the front dipstick. So, they end up drilling out or maybe threading a hole. And I kind of came up with my own solution for this. Now, this is the oil tube thing from I think like a Ford F350, a newer one, maybe a 2000s diesel. And this guy actually is meant to go directly in the pan. So this actually mounts somewhere, I don't know, however it mounts like this in the pan. And I thought this was a pretty good solution. So my idea is to cut a hole in my oil pan, I guess to this circle right there and mount that guy in there. It actually comes with an O-ring. And that'll pretty much save me from having to rebuy the whole front timing cover and then end up modifying the front timing cover. So hopefully this guy works. So I believe that's all of the parts you need to actually change over this engine to fit and mount into the 68 Mustang. The rest of this stuff is kind of tune-up stuff. Obviously I have a pair of headers, got some gaskets, have spark plug wires, valve cover gaskets, and of course an oil pan gasket. All right, so I think the first thing I want to do is to make sure that these engine mount brackets do fit into the car. I'll pull those old 6-cylinder brackets off of here and we'll go from there. All right, perfect. These two guys bolted up perfectly like stock, so that's good. And they look good, ready for the V8. I think the next thing is to, of course, get rid of this exhaust. Ooh, look at those welds. Gorgeous. I'm usually not one to call out bad welds because I'm definitely not a good welder myself, but I definitely plan on doing a little bit better than that. I think that's what it looks like when you try and weld right on rust. And this is some sort of crazy like 2.5 inch to like 2 inch reducer. I think reduced by way of hammer. Glad to get this stuff out of here. All right, so I think this is pretty much ready to go. You know, I think the very last thing I want to do here is maybe make this engine bay a little bit nicer looking. I always get impatient, just throw an engine in and kind of regret not cleaning up the engine bay. And now that the engine's all painted up and it's going to look a lot newer than this engine bay will, I think I'll go ahead and, you know, maybe hit it with a little bit of black paint and might actually go ahead and pressure wash the inside of this guy. All right, much better. I got decades worth of grease cleaned off this thing. So I think I'm gonna let this dry out overnight, and tomorrow morning we'll hit this with black paint and we'll get this guy installed. All right, it's the next day and it looks like all the engine bays dried out. And I did my best to get rid of any sort of like chipping paint or anything like that. I even did a little bit of a hammer and dolly on this guy to try and straighten out this core support. So I think it's ready for some primer. Then I'll hit it with some paint. definitely much better. Actually, this guy I think is the biggest improvement, this front bar here, which is very prominent when you open the hood. So hopefully this will look a little bit nicer and showcase this new engine a little bit better in there. Cool. So while this is drying, I think I'm gonna get this guy lifted up. And there's a couple of things I want to work on here. Of course, I want to drain the transmission, get this new filter installed, and I got to switch out that oil pan as well. All right, we got the transmission oil pan off, and we got this oil pan almost off, but there's this little tab that's holding it on this thing, and I just don't know why. I'm sure there's a reason for this. Maybe to align this thing when you're trying to install it, but it's preventing this thing from coming off, and that means I'd have to take this off, take off the water hose, reseal this guy, and I'm not sure that this is even gonna fit over the pan, the new pan here. So I'm just gonna cut this tab off right now really quick, and we won't have to pull this guy off. Actually, yeah, that's good. Oh, no, not yet. No, it should be. Oh, let me see. Yep.
There we go.
Perfect. All right, there we go. Here's the inside of this guy. Everything looks to be in good shape. I won't bother looking too much into this. I think I'm just gonna run it as is. But we'll have to get this pickup tube swapped out real quick, and then we'll get this new oil pan on. All right, the last two things I have to do is to plug this old dipstick tube, because of course I'm gonna have to relocate the dipstick tube to the front of the pan here, and I do have to plug this guy. It's not threaded or anything, so I'm gonna have to make it threaded. Hopefully I can find a size that's close enough, and I'll carve out some threads, and then we'll plug it with a bolt. All right, it looks like the winner size is a metric 10 by 1.25, which it pains me to put a metric bolt in here, but I think this will be like a permanent sort of thing, so not a big deal, I guess. And I have tons of bolts left over from who knows what project, so I'll get this guy carved out, and then we'll get some RTV and seal it up. All right, got this hole cut out and the thing fitting in there just perfectly. I had to move it a little bit because I realized when I was first measuring this, this is actually on a curved part of the pan, so there isn't quite as much room for the dipstick coming out and around that remote oil filter thing. But if I can't get the dipstick to route correctly, I can always get an aftermarket, you know, like sort of braided metal one that you can snake around whatever angles. So that's plan B if this doesn't work out, but I think this is going to be a good spot for this pickup thing. All right, I feel like I start every video off of, all right. I try not to do it, but it's like, what else do you say?
Pick a different word.
Okay. So we got the oil pan surface all cleaned up. It's looking good, and I'm gonna follow the classic the Honda strategy here, which is to put tons and tons of RTV at any sort of corner of the oil pan gasket here, but I'm gonna keep the rest of it just with rubber because, you know, I don't want to risk this thing slipping out or anything like that. All right, it's time. Got the engine mounts bolted on this thing. Got this thing pushed back a little bit. So let's see how this goes.
Yeah.
So this is the delicate...
Oh. Just a little crack in the... Alright.
A little more...
It's rolling down. Tell me where.
Tighten. Yeah, here.
Okay.
There's the line here. Up the tail shaft. Okay.
Okay. All right, stopping right here.
Go ahead and push it in. Yeah, it's this whole thing. I don't want to slide that in.
Oh, yes.
Perfect. Just like mommy.
You good? Keep going.
I hear it. Yeah,
important.
I hear it.
There we go. Oh man, look at that V8 in there, baby.
Oh yeah.
Woo. That's what it's supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Whew. All right, I got this thing in there finally. It's sitting good. It looks good. There seems like there's plenty of room for headers, so I'm actually pretty happy how this thing's sitting in there. And I got high hopes for these headers fitting. I don't have engine mount bolts, so for now I have screwdrivers stuck into the bolts for the engine mounts, but I'll hit the hardware store and grab a couple of bolts for these guys and get this thing properly mounted in there. But I'm pretty exhausted, so I think I'll call it. It's good to finally see a proper V8 in this guy.